Good morning, and welcome to the CEO Show on Phonoscope Cable, the Source, your business channel. I'm Sheila Harrison. I'm the publisher of the Houston Business Guide, your access to Houston's top executives. You can find us at houstonbusinessguide.com. I'm hosting this morning, and on our show, I'm very pleased to have Michael Fjetland, an attorney right here in Houston who is a specialist in international law and business startups, and also anti-terrorism advice. We're going to hear from him this morning about what businesses can do to prepare for and prepare their employees for any type of anti-terrorism act or act of natural destruction.
Absolutely.
Michael, why don't you fill us in on your background? Tell us how you got started in attorneying and how you got to where you are now.
Well, actually, I went to law school and didn't give much thought to the international arena until I got recruited by a little company called Brown and Root right out of school. And who sent me to Nicaragua right before the Contra Revolution. So
oh my!
Got to see that in action. And then actually we're planning to send me to Iran right before the revolution in 1979, 78 there.
Yeah.
So went on to another major company, Dresser Industries, spent time in probably 30-plus countries with them.
Oh, my.
Before I ended up getting laid off during the oil bust, before everything got better like they are today. Unfortunately, back in the mid-'80s was a different scene.
Yes.
But in the meantime, I've probably covered about 55 different countries and saw a whole lot of things as a result of that.
I guess you saw a lot of upheavals in governments in all those different countries that you were visiting. Because it seems that oil is a lot of times tied to these upheavals.
You don't find oil in Paris and London, unfortunately. They're always in places like Lagos and countries that have unstable governments. So yeah, in fact, I was leaving Jakarta one time, Indonesia, for a flight to Bangkok, and they had a coup right in the middle of my flight. And by the time I got there, it was all over with. But you really have a different perspective on what's going on when you've seen that type of thing.
Well, what brought you back to Houston?
Well, I was here, and this has been my home since the mid-'70s. And so actually, during that time, I got into writing a, quote, a fiction book of what it was like to be an international attorney and negotiator. And well, what could happen? So I did this fictional plot of a flash war in the Middle East and a terrorist attack against the U.S. And in the middle of my book, Saddam invaded Kuwait in 1990. So that happened.
So fiction became reality.
Fiction became reality, and 2 years later was the first bombing of the World Trade Center.
Ooh.
So within 2 years, both parts of the fictional book became an actual reality.
So you never got it published?
No, the publishers kept saying, well, Saddam, he's going to be gone within a year, and we don't want to, publish something that's going to be out of date. And a decade later, he was still around. So.
And the rascal's still around.
And he's still around.
Yeah.
So.
Well, what happened after the book then?
Basically, I ended up going back, doing a lot of law for businesses, getting a lot of startups going, that type of thing. And along came a thing called 9/11. And so I suddenly was back on television as a terrorism expert and spent quite a bit of time talking about what could happen, that type of thing. And it's still a potential threat. Houston is the energy capital of the U.S., and I think would definitely be in the top 5 target category for anybody that wanted to shut down the U.S. Houston would be a prime target.
Yes. I'm afraid you're right. We were talking just before the show, and Houston, people in the United States don't think of Houston. They think of the big business centers as New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles.
Right.
But internationally, everyone thinks of Houston because of the medical center, because of NASA,
yes,
and because of the petrochemical complex, because Brown and Root and Dresser and all of our ambassadors that have been going around the world with the petrochemical industry are all based here.
Absolutely. And it wouldn't take much with our refineries basically running at 100% capacity.
Right now.
Right now, that just crippling one plant would basically put us in a serious jam with our fuel.
Yeah.
So it would not take much to really bring the entire U.S. to a screeching halt if an attack were aimed at our petrochemical complex.
Yeah, that's right. Tell us a little bit about some of the other companies that you're helping start up in the U.S. and internationally.
It's been really quite an array of different types of companies, from the medical area, software area, energy as well. Even got one recently that's starting an HIV negative network where people can confirm that someone is actually negative. And it's kind of
Isn't
moving.
it terrible that we have to do something like that?
You know, these are things we never thought about 25 years ago. We never thought about terrorism 25 years ago. So it's a new world, and I guess the way I was trained was preparation and preventative measures rather than trying to take care of the patient after he's already been in a car wreck.
Yeah.
So by avoiding the problem is better than trying to then have to deal with it. So if you can avoid terrorism, all the better. If you can avoid a disaster in setting up a company, because people often don't really plan on. I met a young man who had taken over his father's company, and they were setting up a joint venture in Australia. And I asked, well, have you met your partner? No. Have you been to Australia? No. This is a major, multi-million-dollar company. He certainly could afford the plane ticket.
Yeah.
But he just wanted a document. I said, I can do a document, but if you don't have the right partner and if you don't know anything about the area, that's not going to help you a whole lot. Well,
You better do some research.
that was the end of me.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, sometimes people don't understand that it's a different culture, different set of laws. You've got to really know who is the right person to do business with is as important as having the right contract.
Yes, and having the right contract in that country's laws, too.
Absolutely, because, I would be doing a deal, say, in Brazil, and then you get on an airplane 2 weeks later and go to China. I was one of the first people that did a negotiation in China in the early 80s. They had no laws.
No.
Basically, if it was in the contract, they'd follow it, but if you left it out, sorry. And then
So you couldn't assume anything.
Nothing.
You couldn't assume that there were laws in place to protect you. You had to have it
Absolutely.
in the wording.
Absolutely. And in some places like Russia, you could have the deal down, and then the law would change, from day to day or whenever they felt like it. And in the Middle East, sometimes, you got the contract, now we start negotiating again.
Yes.
So, a lot of Americans get tripped up because they don't understand the type of culture they're dealing with, and that what we think is a deal or may not really come across that way to them. Mm-hmm. So you really have to know that, and it's just simple things. We'll use slang and we'll use some terms that I know the other side doesn't understand, so half the time you're interpreting, well, what he really meant was, and then they'll use some term back, and that, the American is assuming something different, so you end up having to say, well, what they're really saying is, and that's how you end up trying to really get a match on a term so everybody's on the same page.
So the advice would be, if you're contemplating going into business internationally, you'd better find an international attorney to work with.
Absolutely. Your friend Bubba from school is probably a great guy. Let him do all your domestic things, but if you're going overseas, get somebody who really does know what they're doing, because the mistakes are very expensive and irreversible. I saw the president of a major division go to the Middle East on a trip, apparently impressed the sheikh, and he said, well, have dinner with me tonight. He said, oh, I'm sorry, I've got a plane to catch to Kuwait at 8 o'clock. See ya. Never understood why he didn't get the deal. Never understood that showing up late in Kuwait would actually been a plus. Oh, I'm sorry, I had to have dinner with a sheikh. Ah, cool. They think differently than we do. Now,
and that was a rejection.
And that was a rejection. And not knowing it. And it's simple things like, in Saudi Arabia, if you're sitting there with your legs crossed, the bottom of your shoe is pointing at the guy and you're talking about whatever.
That's a huge insult.
You've insulted him and you didn't even know it. In South America, for example, if you don't ask about the family, you're kind of unfriendly. A lot of the talk is getting to know you. Don't talk about the deal yet until they're ready. But then you go to Saudi Arabia, if you ask, how's the wife and kids, excuse me, you've insulted them. You know, but you
'Cause
don't
that's
ask about
private.
Yeah, absolutely. A man doesn't ask about someone else's wife. So you've got to really be able to mentally switch gears. What country am I in? What are we doing?
And respect their culture.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
You know, in China, it's a bad.
Do you have any funny stories of people who, other than the guy who insulted the sheikh, who have done the wrong thing?
I'd probably rather not tell too much on what people have done, and I'm sure I've done my own thing. Before I went to China, I studied some Chinese just to be able to say, you know, ni hao and a couple things.
Mm-hmm.
And the Chinese used to laugh hysterically when I tried to say something in Chinese.
Yes.
I obviously got it totally wrong. But because of it, we developed a relationship.
They admired that you tried.
That I tried, that I had some interest in that. And as a result of that, when we would throw our big corporate contract on them and say, well, that's our contract, and they'd say, you know, if you want to deal with us, here's our contract. And it was like 5 thin pages with a lot of blanks.
Yeah.
And I go, yeah, how am I going to do this? They would let me pick the words to try to refine a big, large contract into something they would handle.
Yeah.
But you had to have that trust to be able to do that.
Yes.
And without it, it just doesn't happen.
And it comes back down to building a rapport with the individual.
Absolutely. And even in Europe, we think, you know, we all know Europe, sort of. Same thing. If you don't have that relationship first,
Yes.
the deal's just not going to fly.
I would love to know how that deal turned out with the fella who was going to Australia without knowing the partner or having made the trip over there.
I can pretty much predict. Usually they don't end very well.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know, then you should really rely on somebody that does have that experience and listen to them. What I've seen a lot of times is people will go with somebody they know, whether they've been there or not. Well, I've known Bubba for, you know, all my life. And so Bubba's learning on the job too. And, you know, if you want to spend the money, you know, making mistakes that way, that's your business. But I don't recommend it.
Yeah.
You know, like I said, let them stay in the area that they're best equipped to handle, whether it's a Texas deal or maybe national, whatever. In my role, you had to be a local lawyer, you had to be a national lawyer, you had to be an international lawyer. And, you know, the rules between here and Louisiana, for example.
Oh, Napoleonic
Hello.
law.
Yeah. Welcome to Mars.
Yes.
It's a totally different thing. But a lot of it's civil law based on, like, Europe.
Yes.
So it's different, but, you know, I've known people that have at least had the sense to say, whoa, that's Louisiana. You know, better get somebody else involved in that.
Yeah.
But then they'll trot off to China or Japan.
And think that they can negotiate themselves.
You bet. I'll just go in, I'll impress them how much money we've got and how good our technology is and yada, 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 and miss the whole point. It's not how good your technology is. Because if you do have good technology, but you don't establish the right relationship.
That's right.
I saw more games being played in this deal we did in China. They didn't just invite us to come in. We were the American technology for some pollution control. They had, I think, a Swedish group and a German group, and they were trying, the American technology, and then they underpriced us, huge factor, and turned out that it was like, oh, you wanted wheels on that car? So by the time they added in all the extras to get a total package, they ended up being more expensive than we were. But, you know, it was, again,
well, the Chinese were pretty thorough. I imagine they wanted to know everything.
They are smart.
Well, we're going to take a break in just a second, and I'll let you finish that thought, and then we'll be back in just a few. Go ahead. Finish your thought about the Chinese. They are very methodical, aren't they, in their analysis process?
Yeah, they are thinking ahead in decades. We tend to think ahead in a quarter at a time. They're thinking out 10 years.
Yeah.
So
Okay, I'd like to carry on from that thought when we come back. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the CEO Show. I'm Sheila Harrison, your host, publisher of the Houston Business Guide, and I'm speaking with Michael Fjetland. And I'm sure you've noticed from the slides that come up periodically with Michael's information, that his name is spelled differently. Michael, spell your last name for us.
It's a good Norwegian name, Fjetland, all put together.
Fjetland.
It actually means good land in Norwegian, apparently. It's one of the countries I haven't been to yet.
Oh, that's interesting. You'll have to visit your genetic homeland one of these days. Just before the break, we were talking about the different ways that different cultures and countries think about how to build a business. And I mentioned to you that I think one of the biggest disservices the SEC ever did for us was require quarterly financial statements, which make all of our corporations think very, very short term, how they can look good with their numbers at the next beauty contest on Wall Street.
Right.
Whereas other countries, why don't you fill us in, how do they plan?
You know, it's put us at a serious competitive disadvantage because of that fact that we're thinking 3 months out. I understand there's a Japanese company, I don't know if it's Marubeni, Schuster, one of them, has a 250-year business plan. I know that sounds absurd. What the heck am I going to be doing 2.5 centuries from now? But the object is they're thinking out beyond today, next year, into the next decade. And because of that, they're able to really strategically position themselves to be a leader in these technologies.
Yes.
Look at what's happening with our hybrid cars with Toyota.
Yes.
You know, we were thinking short term, what can we do to get through the next quarter? They're thinking, hey, a fuel economy with a hybrid is going to be a big winner. Let's invest in that.
Long term.
Long term.
Because even if energy prices aren't as volatile, we're running out of it.
Absolutely. I mean, there's only so much oil, and you know it takes millions of years to make more of it. So eventually, we're going to get into that situation.
Yeah. So why not be ready?
So you know, I'm really concerned about American competitiveness, as we were talking during the break. I mean, our finance now has gone from New York to London because of Sarbanes-Oxley.
So major corporate financing is now being done in London.
That's the new international finance capital of the world.
Mm.
So we're losing that. A lot of our production has gone to Asia, China, that type of thing. If we continue being short-sighted in our planning,
that's right.
What are we going to be doing? Mowing lawns and working at a fast food place?
Yeah.
I don't want to see that for the future of America. So we've got to look more long-term and get out there with the technologies and the things that will let us be world leaders in the future.
Yeah, and we've got a tax system now that doesn't encourage capital replacement and placement. I understand that there are European countries that give 100% capital, what is it called, when you buy new assets and put them in place?
Depletion. Depreciation.
Depreciation.
Mm-hmm.
So that instead of paying them out over time, you're given a tax credit right then, which encourages building plants and manufacturing facilities and new refineries, which we realized there hadn't been a new refinery started in this nation, what, 30 years?
That's right.
So, and new power plants, because we're eating up electricity now.
Absolutely. We just had a rolling blackout in Houston, of all places, not too long ago. And without some way of generating new power, we're going to be in a problem with that. And so we've got to think about outside the box.
Yeah.
In a number of ways. So, you know, part of being a corporate lawyer is thinking ahead and trying to solve problems rather than, you know, the typical traditional lawyer is, how can I make this billable hour thing just keep on rolling? And I wasn't trained that way. I was trained to, you see a problem, you find a solution for it. And we've got to do that in our corporate way, or we will not be the same country that we have been.
I believe you're right about that. There has to be a change in the way people, John Q. Public, thinks about businesses.
Absolutely.
Over the last 50 to 60 years, we've made corporations enemies of people, which is really insane. If you read your, and kids are being taught this from little guys on up through the school system. Have you ever looked at the cartoons or the kids' comic books? It's always the big bad corporation that's polluting and killing.
Movies. Doing the same thing.
Yeah, where they don't realize that those big bad corporations are the one that create the jobs and put the food on the table, and that there are probably a large majority of corporations that have a real corporate conscience and do things for our nation.
Absolutely.
But the education system we have in America makes corporations the bad guys.
Well, and one of the things that I've stressed since becoming independent is that, we need to think of our corporations that they're not just, can't be just domestic anymore. It's a global economy.
Yes.
If you're based in Texas and that's all you do, whoever's in 49 other states is going to beat you into the ground. But it's gone beyond that now. Now it's going to be whoever is the global player is going to have the access to the lowest common resources or, cheapest goods that they can compete on the market. So we've got to become global in our thinking, global in our education of our kids. We're going to have to compete with Asian kids and European kids in the market.
And those kids aren't taught that business is bad.
No, absolutely not. And they actually even learn English in these countries, and yet we're not really learning much about other cultures. I think they just did a survey recently where we've only been in a war in Iraq for how long now, and 60% of kids couldn't even find it on the map. That's not a good sign.
40% couldn't find Louisiana.
I'm sure they know who the best pop star is, but that's not going to keep us in a strong competitive position in the future.
Yeah, that's an entirely different show we could do on the education system.
Absolutely.
But you're right. Every business in America has to think globally.
And, they have to think globally, and they also, and see, part of what I was doing with this book on terrorism that never got published was what could happen in the world that would affect us here. It's different if you're thinking about moving to Japan and staying there or London or whatever. But what happens in another country 12,000 miles does have an impact on our future.
Absolutely.
I.e., when Al-Qaeda was doing their plotting in Europe and the Middle East, it definitely had an impact on us on 9/11.
It did.
So that is why we have to think beyond our borders. And the immigration issue, obviously another one. One of the big problems we have with immigration, you can build all the walls you want. The economies in South America are pyramids.
Oh, yeah.
Few people at top making everything, everybody else making nothing. They aren't fixing their economy. They just say, well, you don't like it here, you go to North America.
By the way, send the money back home.
By the way, send the money back here, and we won't change anything. Until we make them change their system to offer some real opportunity. People don't want to leave their family to come here.
That's right.
But if it's a difference between eating and not eating and taking care of your family, what they're going to do?
They're going to come.
So the problem is a global problem.
Yes.
And the only solution is to go in and fix that, because building a wall is only treating the symptom. It's not going to get to the root of it.
You're right.
So that's another hole.
You just mentioned something that in your book, you were pointing out the various areas in Houston that could be vulnerable. Why don't you elaborate on that? Because we're talking to Houston business people who need to prepare.
Absolutely, and whether you're a little company or a big company, it's the same, because the impact is going to be on you. Because terrorism is two different things that we talked about earlier. It's man-made and it's also Mother Nature.
Yeah. Well, the same results. You need planning for both of them.
Absolutely. Without, for example, a real basic thing, do you and everyone in your company have a will with a living will and a medical power of attorney? Now, why would I even talk about that? Well, because it's like having insurance and not having insurance.
Yeah.
If you've got it, you're prepared. In Texas, for example, if you die without a will, and I've had to go through this for even, small estates, for a piece of property, everything had to be approved by the court. The lawyer loves it because you get to go to court and ask run up a bill to get appraisal, get it approved, get it, blah, blah, blah. It's a nightmare. If you got the will, if you got the document, it's a done deal. The Terry Schiavo case would have been solved if there had been a living will. Do I want to be hooked up forever on a machine or not? And everybody checks that box, nope, and signs it. Takes away all the guilt from your spouse and your children and all the relatives, and it can avoid a lot of fight.
Yes.
Look, mom, dad, whatever, said this is what they want. So you've eliminated a problem rather than because they know that maybe they need to unplug it, but they're not going to say that because they feel guilty. Oh, what are they going to think?
Yeah, what do people think?
If this way, you don't have to go through that.
Companies can encourage their employees to do that. Companies can bring in attorneys and do whatever it takes to get their employees to think about it, can't they?
They absolutely should. And that's just one element that I found really is overlooked. Either people don't want to think about it, or I'm going to live forever.
Yes.
It's like having insurance. Once you got it, you don't have to worry about if you get in a wreck or somebody backs into you or you miss something. It just takes care of that element, and then you're on to the next thing.
Yes.
Another thing that people need to think about is what happens if we have another Katrina or Rita come through here. We saw what happened last year. It was just absolute. It was like living in a bad movie.
Yeah.
Going in the stores, everything was stripped out. Oops, my refrigerator was empty. And by the time I got around looking for gas, all the gas was gone. So have a plan. If you get separated, if something like this happens or there's a huge explosion, where's the family going to meet? Where are you going to, what is your backup plan? Do you have some cash? Do you have some water? Do you have some MREs or preparation? An ounce of preparation is worth a pound of cure, whatever that is.
On that thought, I'm going to interrupt for a minute. We're going to take a break in just a second and come back and continue this, but finish your thought about the things you need to put on that list.
Have the plan so you have the list of the basics you're going to need in any emergency, whether it's a man-made or a natural disaster.
Yeah, to have a plan. Welcome back, everyone, to the CEO Show. I'm Sheila Harrison, publisher of the Houston Business Guide. Your access to Houston's top executives. You can find us at houstonbusinessguide.com. And today I'm talking with Michael Fjetland, an international attorney who helps businesses get started up, who has a pretty interesting background in international law and international anti-terrorism activity. You've helped by not only having a TV show here in Houston you were telling us about, but you've consulted with governments, right?
I've attempted to consult with the governments. Part of right after the World Trade Center bombing in 1993, I actually did a video program about potential terrorist attack here in the U.S. I had Dr. Ron Hatchett, who had been a weapons expert in the Ronald Reagan administration, come on, and I asked him, look, we have all this going on in the world. I've written this book about a potential attack. Is that possible or not? And he said, oh my, yes. Explained why, there are, at that time, over 10,000 small tactical warheads, nuclear warheads that Russians had as small as a suitcase.
That's where the suitcase bomb came.
Where the suitcase nuke came in, and how that could be a weapon used. And we had drug lords running through South America making billions of dollars. We were trying to kill them. What would they try to do? And then you had the Middle East situation with Saddam, et cetera, involved, Al-Qaeda. And
back then, even Gaddafi.
Absolutely.
And Castro.
The theory I had in the book was that if it were a drug lord or even the Middle East, they wouldn't necessarily want to, for drug lords, you wouldn't want to blow up your market, but if you attacked Washington, you're cutting the head of the snake.
Yeah.
And isn't it ironic that on 9/11, the thing that they were attacking was the Pentagon and Flight 93 was really targeting the Capitol. And if the plane that hit the Pentagon had actually hit Congress first, we would have no Congress.
Yeah.
That's scary.
That is scary.
And it could yet happen again as quietly as someone carrying a little suitcase and putting it down, not even close to where the target is, and they're not going to call until you see, a mushroom. So there are things to be concerned about, and I was concerned about them long before 9/11. Unfortunately, was not able to get anybody to pay attention to it. Now we're working on it, but yet even here in our area, there are things that we are not doing. For example, we are downwind of the South Texas nuclear plants.
Yes.
I have yet to see, one of the things about radiation is it goes into your thyroid. A part of the antidote is to have potassium iodide that keeps it from getting into your thyroid. From Sugar Land, where I live near, to Houston, we're within the footprint. If the wind's from the southwest, we are in the path of any fallout that would happen, not if there was just necessarily attack, but if there was a catastrophic mechanical failure in the plant.
A Chernobyl.
A Chernobyl. I was with the company that was building it back then. I saw some things that really concerned me. That plant is now about 30 years old.
Exactly.
Do you have a plan to take care of that? Well, I have yet to see that. I was talking to an executive with a large chemical plant in the Deer Park area who told me that they had found a couple taking photographs of their plant at 11 o'clock at night. Turns out the man and the woman were from two different countries. He was in one place with the car. She was about a half mile further back on this road. He said, we have a tank. If it is blown up, would kill everybody downwind. There is a road that leads to this thing. It's not a city street. They're still trying to get the city to agree to close off this road to deny access for someone else like that.
Put a gate or...
Because you have the county, you have the city, you have all these people, and they've all got to talk about it. Hello, what is there to talk about? It's on private property.
Shut it down.
Close the road, because it wouldn't take a genius to do a whole lot to go in and do a lot of damage. That would be the thing. We have over 6,000 tankers coming into the Port of Houston every year. They're floating bombs. Mm-hmm. We're worried about the crew that's on the ship. It's silly. All they got to do is drop a match on the ship and it blows up. They aren't the problem. It is somebody that wants to attack that ship.
Yes.
And in fact, what we've done is we've even yanked the phones out at the port where the crew could at least call mom at home and say, hey, I'm still okay. We've antagonized them by denying them access to communications. And they're the ones who could say, hey, there's somebody that's really weird, suspicious, hanging around the docks. But if you alienate the people that could help us, they may not help us.
Mm-hmm. They may harm us.
Absolutely. So we're kind of doing some things that really are not really protecting us, but in fact probably alienating some people that could help us, that we need to change. Yeah. And again, address these issues, because all you have to do is bring down one plant, and our SUVs are dead at the side of the road.
Are you familiar with the planning process and who is on the planning for any disaster in this Houston area, Harris County, 13 counties, or whatever?
I'm not.
You're not aware of any group?
No, I'm saying I'm not on it.
You're not.
I'm not on any of
them. I would think that it would be wise for them to have you on there.
We have a bioterrorism committee in Sugar Land. I'm not on that. I've not been asked to do anything by county, city, state, or national. So, that's their choice. Yeah. But I think I see us still not being totally prepared. Yeah.
So, given the fact that Houston is high profile internationally, and given the fact we have a number of key elements that we could be really hurt by if they were disabled, what would you tell business people about what they need to do to not have the kind of panic we had in front of Rita, to be able to have a good plan for themselves, their companies, their finance, and their people?
And I think you said it, is to have a plan.
Yeah.
If your corporate headquarters is damaged or you can't get to it because of certain things, do you have an alternate already set up where you can go and continue doing business?
Yeah. Employees with notebooks and Wi-Fi somewhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And during a hurricane when you're down, obviously you can travel too much, but you could still have the commuter employees doing their job somewhere else. That's why a plan would take a lot of the fear out of it, because you know what you're going to do. The fear is not knowing what you're going to do, or having all your eggs in one basket and then suddenly it's gone.
And you're out of business.
And you're either out of business or you're damaged severely. We saw that happen during the hurricane, which is a very likely thing. The next 10 to 15 years, they're predicting the storm intensities are going to be like Katrina and Rita scale. We are on the coast. That's not going to change geographically. Every summer, we're going to be looking down the barrel of another potential one of those things.
Yeah, that's right.
You better have a plan.
A good plan.
A very good plan. And then you can, move on and deal with it. We have the prospect now of the Asian bird flu pandemic. That's a totally different concern and totally different strategy required. In that situation, you don't want a bunch of your employees all working together because that's how it spread. In fact, one of your employees on a trip to Asia, maybe China, there's a movie that just came out about this. I didn't get to see it. But the plot of the movie was some business person in Asia picks it up, gets on an airplane, comes back. We've all been on those flights. And if somebody's wheezing and coughing next to you, you walk off the plane, everybody's got it. They go home, come in contact with your siblings, your family. It's a 7-day incubation process. The federal government has just said, well, our plan is everybody's on your own. The cities, the counties, you guys come up with something. That's not much of a plan, frankly. And it in some ways it may be true. I mean, what are they going to do? So the cities, the counties, the individual companies really need to be thinking through what to do in that situation. This is
because
predicted.
Again, if they don't have a plan in place and everybody panics and stays home, how can a company exist and run?
Absolutely. And this bird flu thing is kind of like talking about terrorism before 9/11. Tomorrow. I'll think about it later. Yeah. And then it hits and everybody, what's happening? Well, this one is more serious than a hurricane. You can see the hurricane coming, and get the heck out of the way. But with bird flu, it's an invisible killer. It will mutate at some point. It is going to be something we don't have vaccines yet for. Yeah. We're just now, the government is starting to learn how, we're still making vaccines the old-fashioned way. Yeah. You take an egg and, you got to have it. And the Europeans and others have got new ways of doing this that we need to upgrade. Yeah. Our medical center is another potential a terrorist attack area, and yet it could also be the area that protects us if there is a pandemic flu in developing some new novel vaccine process rapidly, quickly, getting it distributed. Yes. So what are they doing on this? I'm sure they're probably thinking about it. They're doing something. I'm really not privy to that. But that is going to be a key component of prevention or minimizing the potential damage.
Because we saw with what happened on Houston streets what panic looks like.
Oh, it was
because
ugly.
Of Katrina, people were so fearful of Rita that people left who didn't need to leave.
Absolutely, and that kept the people that needed to leave from getting out. And if we actually had been hit by a Category 5, I kept thinking the roof on the house is going to come off about 110 miles per hour. Yeah. We're talking about 160 mile an hour winds.
Yeah.
But
and how far inland would they still be 160? But the whole idea is, I think we keep coming back to a plan. If you've got a plan, people don't have to panic.
Absolutely. Like you see the storm coming, don't wait till the last minute. Yeah. Go out. The people that left real early were okay. Mm-hmm. Those who waited actually to the Friday before the storm, there was no traffic. It was everything in between. Yeah. I'm in the Civil Air Patrol, or was, and in Columbus, that was the first place everybody hit going out. They said it was so horrible. Yeah. People had their animals, they were dying.
Oh, yeah, it was terrible. Welcome back to the CEO Show. I'm Sheila Harrison, your host. I publish the Houston Business Guide, and I have with me Michael Fjetland, an international attorney who has been talking with us about planning for not only terrorism that might happen in our area, but natural disasters and just general good business planning to make sure your company can keep on going in any kind of a disaster.
Absolutely.
We were talking about Houston in particular. If you were talking to a person who is about to begin a business, who were thinking about making that step and becoming an entrepreneur, would you say Houston is a good place to start a business?
I would say definitely yes. You know, we are an entrepreneurial city, unlike some places where you got to be blue blood and part of the clique. It's a wide open town. There was just I think in a Forbes article we were talking about where they said that Houston real estate is the place to come right now. I just had an example of a gentleman that bought a house in the Woodlands, $200,000. He was so thrilled. He said, you know, this house in Connecticut would cost $1 million. So he's calling all of his friends, hey, come on down to Houston. But we basically pride ourselves in being an open city, and it does work. I would highly recommend anybody wanting to start a company. Houston's a great place to do it.
We got a good tax environment, maybe, until that last little thing that Rick Perry signed in.
Compared to other places, I would say we're still pretty much a low tax area. We don't have a lot of strict zoning like some places where you can. I'm just amazed at places where I used to trade for decades have suddenly gone, and they're building brand new facilities in there. It's just amazing the transformation going on from the mid-'80s when there was nothing happening in Houston to now.
Yeah.
But we're not, I don't think we're in the bubble like the West Coast and the East Coast where it's overpriced. And
that's what the Forbes article said.
They're now coming here. The population trend is for us to double in size the next 20 years. That's not a bubble. That's actual people moving here, creating new jobs, new traffic issues and other issues to deal with. But that, for a business-minded entrepreneurial person,
healthy.
That's good. That's more people coming in for business. And you see all kinds of things firing up here. Yeah. So I would say have at it, whether you're setting up an Inc., an LLC, or whatever it is. This is a good place.
You said something interesting just a minute ago, because I usually ask the question, does the good old boy network work for you, against you in Houston?
You know, it never hurts to have some good old boy and good old gal network. I mean, networking is kind of the lifeblood of being an entrepreneur. But it's not like some places where no matter how good you are, you'll never get in. And I'm not going to say anything about our sister city to the north, but Houston, it doesn't matter who your family name is or whatever. You got a good idea, people are going to listen to you.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that is part of that old-fashioned American, you know, wide open, competitive spirit. And I think I'm really high on Houston for a good place to start a business, grow one, go for it.
What would you say to that person out there that's just thinking about starting a business? They've got a great idea, they believe in it, and they think it's something that could be really be commercialized. What would you say to them about starting a business right now?
I would say find a good business attorney, not somebody who does divorce work and or something else, you know, and work with them and just go for it. It doesn't take a whole lot of money to start to set up a company. First of all, get yourself a corporation.
Yes.
So you got limited liability. I'm still shocked by people that are running sole proprietorships, and if something goes wrong and some lawyer comes in and sues, everything you got's up for grabs.
Yeah.
So, but once you've got an incorporation or LLC, what have you, then you've got limited liability. Go for it. Maybe take an S election so you don't have to do the double taxation, so you got the advantages of corporation, and you had a single tax instead of a double tax situation. Probably find yourself a good accountant and have a business plan and go for it.
And go for it.
Go for it.
Good time, good place.
I think it is a good time. I've seen it during the worst of times, and I've now seen it during a couple of the best of times. And I would say we are really in an upswing period right now. We're the energy capital. Oil is high. There's a lot of energy-related work here.
Yeah.
Housing is strong.
Interest rates are still
Interest rates
historically very low.
Very modest compared to what they've been, and they will not be a bar to do anything. There's a lot of capital, and one of the things tying back to the international is that a lot of the financing going on today are from international investors. You have people coming in from China wanting to buy real estate. I mean, they may not speak much English, but they've got cash to throw down on a business or a house or whatever. It's amazing from all over the world. So if you don't understand a lot about different cultures, you better, because if you want the money, a lot of that is what is keeping us really going.
Yes, a lot of foreign investment in the U.S.
Absolutely. That is what's really financing most of our real estate right now, is foreign investment. You can still buy things and get practically 100% financing. You know, I got to sign myself up for some of that at some point here.
I saw some mortgage deals the other day. They said they will give you 110%. That is insane.
I know, and that may not be the healthiest thing, but at the same token, the market is absorbing a lot of this stuff. Yeah. And so whatever it is you plan to get into, or even if you're an established company, I would say it was a good time to branch out and expand.
You mentioned a good attorney, a business attorney, someone who knows business, a good accountant. Who else should a new entrepreneur starting a business want to put in their board of advisors? What other mentors should they look for?
Obviously, you'd want to have a good source of investment, whether it's an investor or with a bank. But I would also encourage them to have someone on the board that has some knowledge in the area that they're getting into. Maybe it's somebody who's retired. It always pays to have a mentor. You know, and we've got SCORE, the Service Corps retired executives who have actually managed large companies. Now they're retired. Now they can turn around and help the budding entrepreneur. Very good advice. And the Small Business Administration has services for companies that are setting up. There are services like that. The Small Business Development Center that's run through the University of Houston is another excellent resource for people that are getting into business. And they can help guide you to certain, lawyers and accountants and things like that, who will even start off on a discounted rate for people that need that. So the resources are there. Look around. They're all on the internet. Find someone with the Greater Houston Partnership is another organization I would highly recommend being involved with. Showing up at those committee meetings, you meet a lot of people.
That's right.
And let me tell you,
in your industry even.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that leads to business, that leads to contacts. The local real estate, there's like a real estate network here. And every week they get together for lunch at HoustonCran.com. And what do you have and what do you want? And by the time they go through 30 or 40 people, like, I've got this or I need that, there's somebody else that I know somebody interested in a medical building or a piece of property in that area or, this type of thing. It really does work.
It does work. It does work. If you had one thing to say to a new entrepreneur, person building today, or even someone who has a successful business here in Houston, if you had one thing to say that you thought could help them right now in our situation that they need to be doing or thinking of doing, what would it be?
Hire Michael Fjetland.
There you go. There you go.
No, I would say have a plan and work to your plan, because actually without a plan, you don't really know where you're going. It's kind of like taking a trip without a road map.
You're talking about a business plan.
A business plan.
That's right.
And business plan is often one of the first things you need, and one of the last things that sometimes people do. Yeah. I would say that, and then get into something that you really do know. Yeah. Because if you're branching into an area that you're not familiar with, you're going to make a lot of mistakes along the way. And the money may not last as long as your experience curve. But mainly, I'd say do your homework, get some good people involved with you that you know, that you trust, that have skills that are complementary between an accountant, a lawyer, and a couple other people. You've got a good team, and then just go for it.
Great. And also, in these times, have a contingency plan for any kind of disruption?
You know, Houston used to have this saying, expect the unexpected, and that still plays out because we don't know what's going to come down the pike. I'm bullish on Houston and what the future is. But there will be some bumps. There will be maybe another hurricane, maybe some flu virus, whatever it is. But you know what? We're still going to go on.
That's
right.
And
the ones who are going to do well have had a plan, they've worked it out, and you keep pushing. Because life is going to keep on turning. The sun will come up tomorrow. This is a good place to see it.
It is.
And I would say if you've got those things, then I know a lot of people that, even with limited education, are now millionaires just from getting out there and doing that.
In Houston.
In Houston.
In Houston. All right. Well, we've only got a couple of minutes left. And I'd like to have you repeat for us your thoughts on how critical it is that people have this contingency plan for any kind of disruption that we might have. And as you said, that could be any kind of disruption.
It's just part of your package is the way I would put it. For example, as we talked about earlier, if you don't have a will and all that stuff, you've really left your family high and dry. And that's not really looking after your family. I know people don't want to think about it and talk about it, and I've seen them, in different cultures sometimes are really even more so that way. But once you've done that simple thing, it doesn't take a lot. And once you get your signatures down, it's done properly. If you've got the wrong witnesses and things like that, you can void your will. But then you have really taken care of your family, and then you move on to your business. Sometimes people have partner disputes, and that's another thing that can come up. So you'll need a good attorney, I guess, to help sort that out.
That's right.
Somebody have a buy-sell agreement. If suddenly we don't get along, either you're buying me out or I'm buying you out, but it's a done deal. And I've been involved with those as well. And I've seen where lawyers have messed up because then the partner that gets bought out suddenly doesn't have a non-compete clause, so they go off and they start a competing business. And hello, you just spent all this money to buy a business, and now your ex-partner's out there doing the same thing. I've got that situation right now. It's not a pretty sight. In fact, it really bounces back on the legal profession. If you haven't put it in there, you probably haven't done your job very well.
So it's dangerous to start a business without consulting an attorney. Is that a good commercial?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, folks. Well, we're going to have to wrap it up for today. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Sheila.
You've given us a lot to think about, and a lot we were already probably aware of, but not totally aware of that we needed to be doing.
Don't be afraid. Just go for it.
Just get your plan in place.
Things will be okay.
All right.